Good morning, church. Before I came to Grace, I ran a race in Minnesota. And after I finished the race, I looked around and I saw a group of what appeared to me to be African natives who were sitting under a tree. And they were starting to pack up their bags. They were sitting in the tree because it was cool. The race had been hot. They had already cooled down. They'd already eaten the food that was set before them. They'd already dried off. And I just finished the race. So I went over to them quickly because I wanted to have a conversation with them, find out a little bit more about them, and to discover that these were some of the lost boys of Sudan. You might recall the lost boys of Sudan from some 15, 20 years ago. These were Sudanese, about 40,000 boys who had been driven out of South Sudan by the Sudanese in the north as a part of ethnic cleansing. And what was unique about these boys were they survived because they got out of town and most of their relatives were all killed, their villages destroyed. So in other words, they made their way out of Sudan. Most of them made their way into Ethiopia, where they ended up in refugee camps. And then Lutheran Social Services, together with Catholic relief services, a variety of relief agencies, people of faith came alongside because a lot of these Sudanese boys were Christian. And they had suffered because of their ethnic as well as their Christian faith. And so these organizations brought them through immigration services into the United States. And here they were as young people who had lost everything they had, most importantly, their families. They found themselves in a distant land where there was a language that they needed to learn, amongst a people who had different customs and traditions than they had. Certainly, being in Minnesota when you are from South Sudan is a vastly different climate. So they needed to orient from what is more of a tropical climate, close to the equator, into a climate of being in the north. And what I discovered about them was how quickly I learned about their gratitude. They were filled with such gratitude and graciousness. Here were young people who had experienced tragedy, crisis, suffering, grief, total loss, and yet their hearts were overflowing with gratitude because people had taken them in. And they were now finding themselves having completed high school and some of them now beginning college, having families who opened their homes to them and opened their lives to them. And now they had new families. Amazing stories. We can look at the world in which we live today. We can look at the Rohingya who have been driven out of their homeland, who find themselves in one of the poorest countries in the world in Bangladesh, who has difficulty providing for their own people food for the day, now finding all of these refugees who find themselves in their borders. And so we live in this world as we navigate these different stories. And today it speaks to me as we listen to the prophecy of Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a prophet at a time when the Jews of the south, in places like Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Judea, had been driven out of their homeland, taken captive. They found themselves thousands of miles away in what is today Iran, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, if you will. All these words that maybe you learned about in 5th grade. And it was there that they found themselves locked in to refugee-type prisoner camps. They were in a different land where the customs, the food, and everything had changed. Their homes had been burned to the ground in Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem had been destroyed. The temple had been torn down. Where they experienced God had been destroyed. So along God sent prophets. They were there roughly 70 years. If you were an adult like me, 70 years, we're not going to survive our time in that land. We're going to be buried in that land. It was our children and our grandchildren, if there was ever to be hope, who would move back to their homeland. And along God sent a prophet by the name of Ezekiel, one of the prisoners there. And Ezekiel 37 has this visionary picture that he begins by speaking. There's no way we can understand it but by trying to visualize it. It opens up with these words in verse 1 of chapter 37. The hand of the Lord came upon me, says the prophet Ezekiel, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. Just imagine that. He's seeing himself sitting with nothing but bones. Because what he is imagining is his homeland and his people who have been destroyed. I can imagine for the longest time the lost boys of Sudan could only imagine what they left behind as they ran away from the destruction behind them. We saw some glimpses of that kind of destruction this week as you watched the fires destroying homes in Southern California. Vast numbers of homes, as you saw and heard about the dozens of horses that burned to death trying to race their way out. The people who suffered and died. We saw destruction and warfare going on today in a little town of Bethlehem, as rocks and bullets were exchanged, as people were killed because of the conflict in Bethlehem and Ramallah and on the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. Devastating times. But God did not leave Ezekiel with this vision of just bones and destruction. At the end of our reading for today, the Lord said this through Ezekiel, I will put my spirit within you, he says to the people in captivity, and you shall live, and I will place you on your own soil. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and will act. God promised through Ezekiel that there would come a time when they would return home. And there's nothing quite like going home when you have the opportunity to go home. Homing in the very presence of God. For the Sudanese refugees, the lost boys, Minnesota, Illinois, different places have now become their home. They have new families. There was no place for them to return. So they have rooted in a new place. And thanks be to God for these kinds of principles that we have spoken about in the past. First of all, that it all begins with God, which is a truth we must stand on as we listen to the Word of God. God was with the Jews as they were taken off into captivity. God had not forgotten them. God walked with them through the valley of the shadow of death, Psalm 23. And was with them in their captivity. God was with the Sudanese as they ran from their homeland into Ethiopia. God was with them when they went through the resettlement process and found themselves into new homes in new places. And God is certainly with them as they have rerouted and started to create a new future. God is with us as we walk through the various challenges of our life. But let us be mindful of the fact that there are many people who are experiencing, for most of us, much greater heartache and hardship than what we'll ever know. And yet God is with them too. God is with us in the good times as well as in the hard times. And oftentimes it's the hard times that open us up to recognize our need for God, our awareness and our desire for God. Interestingly enough, in the last decade, here in the United States, roughly 700 to 800,000 worshipers, Christian worshipers, 700 to 800,000 worshipers no longer worship in Christian churches. Okay? Every year, 700 to 800,000 are falling through the cracks. Is that a significant amount? It's just short of 1 million people a year are giving up, quote unquote, on religion for a whole variety of reasons. but what they hunger for, what has changed when they ask them if they still have faith, or what are they looking for. 20, 30 years ago, people were looking for a God of love. Today, they're looking for a God who's alive, a living God. They are hungering for the experience of God and not finding it in the church as it goes through its rituals and its rites. My hope and our prayer is, as we open our hearts, friends, that we too might be experiencing God as we come together, one with another, sharing our joys and our heartaches, that we experience that we're encouraged in our faith, because faith is a word that describes not something simply that we believe, but something that we live. It's how we live our life. You see, in this movement that's happening of our country becoming increasingly secular, God is calling us, like Ezekiel, to stand up in what is becoming a valley of bones, of people who once were active and participating in Christian community and now find themselves on the outside. But God can use us to be a living witness as we're sent out into this world. If we truly believe that as we come together, that God is here in our midst, that as we eat and drink of the meal that we celebrate every other week here at 10:30, that we experience the living promise that Christ is with us, that as we gather and pray, that God hears our prayers, that we experience God within our souls together. That's my hope and our prayer. That we don't just go through the motions, that we're living out some kind of a play here where we've all learned our lines and we've all learned when to stand and when to sit and when to bow and when to come up and open up our hand, when to eat and when to go sit down. I pray and hope that we might hear, like Ezekiel said, the Spirit of the Lord is within us. The Spirit of the Lord is at work within us. Not only today when we gather, but certainly when we scatter. That the Spirit of the Lord is with you, and that our eyes and our hands and our feet might be open, that we might demonstrate the living God who has not forgotten anyone. It's not that people have lost their spirit within, but they've lost their trust of religion. And so may God empower us to begin to live in a way that actively demonstrates, as we serve, as we serve those that we encounter, as we speak truth and do the best that we are able in our workplace, we might demonstrate God's amazing mercy in our lives. So it all begins with God, certainly. It's God who is moved in our midst. But secondly, God works through us. The people who opened their hearts and their lives to the lost boys demonstrated that God worked through them, which restored hope in the midst of despair for these young boys. And as we do what we do in the name of Christ, and I know that you do what you can do in the name of Christ, as we do that, as we serve others, you see, people experience through us that God is working through us. It's all about integrity, matching up what we do and how we seek to live our life. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for that kind of authenticity that matches. You say you're Christian, you say you're involved in a faith community, then what difference does this faith community make in your life? Is there any more mercy? Is there any more love? Or are you just like everybody else that is only looking out for ourselves? And I know God's at work in our lives in that way. And thirdly, it's about relationships. It's all about the relationships that we have. Because it's through our relationships where we build trust with people and people build trust with us, so that people can see in us the trust we have in God. See how that works? That's what's authentic about it. It's not so much what we say. It's about who we are and how we live. That's what Christ called people to do in his day, to follow him so they might see what he did and how he lived, and they could begin to live and to do what he did. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So I thank God for you today. I thank God for you today. May you sense God's mercy and love in this place today, that you might sense God's grace upon you today. Enough grace for this moment. Though we'd like to have all the issues in our life resolved right now, amen? It probably isn't happening that way. Because it requires us to walk by faith and to work at what God has given us to do, which includes relationships, which can be some of the messiest things in our life. Yet at the same time, they can be some of the most rewarding things in our life. Because we learn about life through our relationships. As we work our way through, as we struggle in the midst, we find out who is standing with us and who really isn't willing to be there for us. Amen? We find out who is willing to work and practice this forgiveness and who isn't willing to do it, and how we work these things out in the name of God. One thing I can assure you we discover in Scripture is that God doesn't give up. God's mercy is here for us. We don't have to get our act together before we experience God's mercy and His love, and that's what's so amazing about it. I don't have to grovel on my knees for countless hours for the things and the ways that I fail God. I can simply open my heart and God comes in. And we can begin to work at what God cares about the most, is bringing about change in my life. Stop groveling about the mistakes you made. Let's start working on the things that we can work on together to make a change inside of you. Because it's only as God brings about change inside of us that we can share that change by how we serve and demonstrate God's mercy to others. Finally, what I want to share with you, friends, is that despite the fact that we don't have it all figured out yet, God still works through us, huh? With all our bumps and bruises, with all our nicks and failures, with all the stuff that isn't quite worked out yet, for those of us who are still kind of rude, some kind of short-tempered, God still works through us. Though we may not be the most charismatic, loving, dynamic people in the world, God takes average and ordinary and does some pretty extraordinary things. And for that I say amen. Amen to that. Blessed are the ordinary, and may God bless our ordinary today, that we might be able to reflect God's amazing, extraordinary love today. Please keep in your prayers today those Rohingya refugees, people who find themselves suffering and oppressed in East Africa, like in Niger and Nigeria and other parts, Cameroon, etc. Please keep in your prayers our own community and our own neighborhood, where God calls us to be a light. And may God allow our light to shine as we seek to serve and demonstrate God's love. Amen. We listened to a song today.